one of the very first artists that worked out there. ULA is in West Islip, and I've known about it since college. So I went to Cooper Union, and I fell in love with printmaking, and the litho shop was always empty, and that's what brought me in there. I had the place all to myself, and it was a lot of work, which made it a ghost town. And I loved printmaking, and when I got out of school, 1986, I went to MoMA for an exhibition. I saw Jasper Johns, 0 through 9, lithographs with touche and crayon, and I love printmaking, and touche is this one beautiful technique that you'll see it throughout. It's like a wash, but it's got reticulation, so it kind of looks like pond scum. It's got beautiful texture, and I'm looking at his 0 through 9, and I thought, I could do that. And I thought, I don't know what I mean by that, but I was like, I could print it, I could do that. And in my sketchbook, I wrote the name of the workshop that made it, because I thought they're going to be on my radar. They've been on my radar forever. And I always kept that there. And I graduated, went off to grad school, realized I'm an artist, not an anthropologist, came back, pounded the pavement, got my first job, lucky me, as a printmaker. And I worked in Tribeca at Flavan Editions. And it was a one-woman operation, and I printed etchings, I editioned etchings, and I collaborated with artists on monoprints. So it felt really comfortable to have an artist in front of me and try to get a sense of what you want. What do you want to do today? Are we starting with a rolled up plate? Are we starting are we drawing? And we would start the projects from start to the editioning. And this workshop was wonderful for me. I was fresh out of school, I had a decent portfolio, and this woman trusted me, Cheryl Palavin. And that mentorship really gave me the confidence to become a printmaker. So I always thought, I'm going to build up to being good enough to apply to ULAE. And then 1989, the stock market shifted, and then my boss said, I can't afford to keep you, what can I do? So I said, make a phone call. So she made a phone call on a Thursday. I interviewed on Saturday, and I was working on Monday. And I thought, whoa, this is really easy. Okay, I'm in. And I was interviewed and looked through my portfolio. And one thing I always tell my students, like, watch out, they'll look at the back of your prints. Just when you're making everything pristine, during my interview, they looked at the back, and that was a telltale sign. How do I handle paper? Because my job was going to be to handle paper as carefully and as thoughtfully as possible. So when I got to the workshop, I thought, these are my heroes. And I followed everything that ULA did that ever was exhibited, and they had a tradition of a sit-down lunch. So everybody would come from all of the workshops and have lunch, and they had an in-house chef. And so I came to my first lunch, and there was somebody that I recognized from commuting on the train. And then he says to me, you're among the gods of printmaking. And I was like, oh, I know. And it was really true. It was really cool. But one of the things that was really notable about this workshop was it was started by a Russian woman. If you've read basically all of the text and the signage, Tonya Grossman was this incredible woman who was a visionary in the sense that she was resilient. Her husband was a painter, and after he had a heart attack, they needed an income. So she decided to propose to artists to come and take their works and transform them into silkscreens, and then be able to market those silkscreens. And as legend has it, they moved to a property in West Islip that had lithostones. And lithostones were used for commercial printmaking. And when a lot of workshops were using offset printing and they were no longer using heavy stones, they were being discarded. A lot of workshops were literally chucking them into the East River. And she found a few stones, and then she got the press just as easily and found a printer. So then she started ULAE and invited Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg to come out to make drawings. And the important thing was to come and draw directly on the stone, be in the moment, make the artwork. You wouldn't come with images that you wanted to complete. You would create on the spot. Larry Rivers' work is an example of that, and she came from she was European, she's Russian, and in Europe, printmaking was always an extension of artists' studio practice. Most artists had some affiliation with a workshop to make lithographs or etchings. The Impressionists, they got all in the press, and he invited his colleagues to come, and they would take part in this. And you would reach another market by making prints. So that fluidity in it's just another medium was really, really comfortable for her. Over here in the United States, it was a lot less common. And when she met Larry Rivers and invited him out, a lot of what was important to her was to have a cultural life, to get together, to have poets meet with artists, and to do these collaborations. So the Donkey and the Darling, that whole series of stones was printed on the spot. Both the artist and the poet wrote on it in reverse together, and they joked and they laughed, and the work developed with that spirit, that spontaneity, and that immediacy. And the pieces that were loaned by ULA are actually working proof. So you'll see notations, you'll see things glued, taped in spots. So this is kind of a really unique set that they loaned to you. So the collaborative nature of what they were doing together was one thing. But then if you look in the film, it really shows the hands-on. You have the other person in the room is the one that hovers over you to make sure that you've drawn dark enough. The one that's in charge of when you go and go away, that everything all night, if necessary, works out technically. So I had the great luxury and pleasure and honor of being that person, that other person in the room with a lot of artists. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and talk a little bit about the work. So Larry Rivers illustrates basically a lot of the early stonework. Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg were two of the early artists, and they were in their 20s when they came out. And they were, just loving it here on Long Island. And it's a small world, and you must all know this. It's a lot of, the artists only came to ULE through recommendation. They were invited. So Tonya Grossman would go and look at the artist's work, and then Bill Goldson, who took over Tonya Grossman's position when she passed away, also invited his artists by looking at the work, by getting suggestions from different artists to come and work and try something. Tonya Grossman worked so hard. She would have the artist's work, take portfolios into Manhattan and pitch them to MoMA, pitch them to galleries, and just to try to promote these artists because she thoroughly believed in them. And in turn, she was not doing well financially, but she knew that there was the vision of bringing a new cultural life to New York, to Long Island, and it was a beautiful haven of artists having freedom to explore. Artists would come out, and they would have at their disposal between 1 and 7 printers as we grew. I was the one female printer for a while. There were individuals that would just edition and others that would collaborate, so you kind of had to earn your spot to be in the room with somebody like Jasper Johns, and you said all your prayers and crossed your fingers and toes that everything that you did would be perfect. Otherwise, he would look up and say, "Why is she here?" or "Why is he here?" And people would be kicked out and never show their face when Jasper was out. When an artist came out, he was the only artist, she was the only artist. All of the work of anybody else had to be put away. We wouldn't talk about, as if they're the only person that existed. And that was really important to her, to have the freedom to, she invited artists that didn't have a lot of printmaking background, which I think was advantageous in that they did not know what the limits were. So they didn't know, you can't do that. And if any of you have heard about Picasso, Picasso always tried to reinvent a process because he may have been familiar with how it was done, but what if we try this? What if we try that? And having that spirit of inquiry was something that we had to do. So after I was interviewed, I saw my work, saw the work that I had printed of different artists, and Bill Goldson said, "You know that you are not the artist here." I said, "I know. I'm here," and I came with complete humility that I would be somebody's hands, another set of hands. And that was wonderful, because I thought, I am 100% here for you, and that artist needed to feel that they were the only ones that existed there. So no remnants of even anybody's materials. And as I walked through the show one more time, I realized, like, when you see the work coming out of a workshop, there's an individuality that extends. There's not like everybody's using the same flavor, everybody's using the same palette. And that's what makes ULAE's opportunity, that they still offer this to artists to come out and play, no limits. And a lot of times you'd be printing and it's ready to edition and you're not going home because the stars have aligned and the color is running just right, and Jasper just approved it, so you're gonna print all night till you're done, because if you clean the rollers off the press and there was just enough contamination from another color and you're trying to start off fresh and clean, you might have lost that one warmth to the color. You might just start up clean, but it'll be wrong. So there was a lot of pressure on getting it as the artist wanted. So we were just there, like, trying to do our best all the time. And I had the opportunity to work with some amazing artists, some amazing printmakers. I was speaking to Janice. Some of these papers are on handmade papers. I had a whole prepared chat for you, different degrees of collaboration. So ULE was really special in that they did not hold anything back. So these lunches were fabulous. Everybody came all sweaty and dirty from all the workshops to sit with the artist of the day, to sit with whoever the visiting collector was. And everything was equal. Everybody had the opportunity to meet all of these special individuals and to have regular conversations, and then get back to work when we were all done. And some of them were like, multi-course meals with wine, and it was great. But then you went back to work. And part of that was like, you as a person, you were doing your part. In Japanese prints, you will have the artist seal, the printer seal. Every single individual that's involved in that would have their seal. So all of these prints have the ULE embossment, and I had my own. When my first job, my boss said, I want you to get yours because I want your mark on everything that comes out of here, in addition to the workshops. And when they saw my mark, Bill's like, you will not be putting that on anything. I'm like, nope, absolutely not. But the acknowledgement of the fact that in order to collaborate on prints, it's not just the artist, and it's not just the artist plus the workshop. It's like the full career of every individual that's giving their craft to your work. So in Japan, that was always acknowledged. We have our acknowledgement in the form of documentation sheets. And so 1986, I saw the Jasper Johns 0 through 9. 1996, Jasper Johns had a retrospective in Moment. I checked the date this afternoon, and I had work that I had printed for him, and he gave credit where credit was due. So we were all listed there, right next to that big Jasper Johns print.
Wow, that's great.
That was really cool.
Wow.
So I always tell my students, like, anytime you see something that's like, whoa, it's like all the bells and whistles, super complex, it's like, just understand, it's like, this is like many people's work, many people's careers go into helping you to get that amazing perfection there. And it'll be in the documentation. Chuck Close is somebody who came to do a little bit of photography at ULA, and he has a book, Process and Collaboration, where he talks about the process of collaborating, where there's diplomacy involved, and just acknowledges that I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for this Japanese printmaker who's 90 and his whole life has been about this, and I tapped into him as a resource. So basically being the tools was, a big honor. One thing just about the workings of ULAE, we have like blue chip artists, and in order to have somebody that is really fairly new, they continued making prints with ULAE and kind of being co-owners of the company, and therefore we could take a chance on somebody like Jane Hammond or Kiki Smith. And part of the freedom that the artists were given is you came in to make a print, and nobody was going to say, this should be done in 3 months. This should be done within the year. Some of the prints went on for years, months and months and months. All the resources, all the collaborating, we were getting salaries. Everybody is being paid, and there is like zero product. So they were basically, they had the young artists back as long as it took until they were ready. And it was like a beautiful transition that like the parents, they will support the children until they could stand on their own, until their work has, a maturity, a market, and then we can go forward. So Jasper and Rauschenberg were really two of the cores that allowed Kiki Smith to come, Lisa Yuskavich, Jane Hammond, a lot of the newer artists, and completely was unlimited, universal. She started unlimited art editions. Lunch was amazing. Tonya was amazing. A tricky thing about Tonya, so she only had men working with her, so I'm not sure she would have been cool with me working there, because she had very specific feelings about a woman's role. And looking at the images of the press, that's the litho press at Skidmore. All the stones are out there, and so I have 4 kids, and I worked through all of my pregnancies, and they actually put a lever extension just so I wouldn't have too much abdominal pressure while pulling the lever down. So it was the kind of thing where we were all this amazing team that we all had something to contribute. There were some etchers. This started with lithography, then we had etching presses, offset litho presses that Bill Goldston introduced after the war because he was working doing printing materials. So he introduced Jasper Johns to it. So some of these images are on direct presses, some of them are on transfer presses. There's an image in this exhibition that has digital work. So as technology progressed, we would have individuals actually like learning what Photoshop came out, like learning how to apply a lot of new processes and offering it to the artists. And being able to offer somebody a new toy to play with was really amazing. Yeah. Any questions?
Lorena, I wonder if you knew Bob Blackbird, who had an open studio at printmaking in Manhattan for many, many years. But it was open to all, meaning it was irregardless of your level of expertise. And he died recently.
Right.
You opened also a workshop at Gallery North.
Yes.
And is it open to all levels?
All levels.
All levels. And you do lithography?
No. So we're a green workshop at Gallery North, and lithography is very taxing. We've got solvents galore. So yeah, Bob Blackburn, he passed away, and he actually got a MacArthur grant, and he was told he can't use it on putting it back into the business, but he did. And the Elizabeth Foundation keeps his workshop going, and they're not far from Penn Station. But I actually, when I was a student, I interviewed to get an internship there, and they had a program where they would invite artists from all over the world to come and make prints. And the place was so filthy, it was so horrible. I thought my portfolio was going to get contaminated if I even opened it up in here. But it was like really dynamic, and he worked at ULAE. He was one of the first printers at ULAE, and there's a notorious stone. So stones, if you look on the press, stones require a scraper bar and a lot of pressure. So sometimes they break. This is limestone, 130 million years of sediment.
I hear they're not even available anymore, the lithographic, so they come from Yugoslavia?
Bulgaria, and they tried to mine some in Utah, but they were not as good. And Stony Brook, so where I teach lithography, and this is one of the last places that you can actually learn stone lithography. And it's a lot of work.
One of your predecessors, Dan Weldon.
Yes, he taught there.
He taught lithography, still does, and
Yes.
he's also well known on Long Island.
Yes.
He's at Santa Harvard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Dan Weldon worked at Stony Brook. A lot of amazing things that he left in place. It's not a green technique. It's chock full of solvents. You sweat. You get blisters. I'm going to start the semester on Monday. By Wednesday, when we grind the stones, I'll know how big my class is. And I try to scare somebody away because if you can't do it, it's physically hard work. Yeah, no, I've had surgery to repair my shoulder from like many years of it, but it's exhilarating and it's amazing. So you can bet that Jasper never rolled up a stone, nor did Larry Rivers, that there was somebody there like throwing their body into it for them. But that was part of it. So when I worked at ULE, I had the opportunity to work with Elizabeth Murray and Kiki, and they put me with the women because they thought, you know, women artists, collaborators, why not? And it was actually fortuitous because Kiki did a lot of things where she took her clothes off, so they're like, oh yes, let's close the door, you guys take care. She wanted to get skin impressions continually, so we actually rolled up the litho press and she rolled on it and I rolled on a plate and we're like, Kiki, we could just like put grease on you. No, it's gotta be ink. So then she needed help in the shower because she's had all this black ink all over her. And it was great. I had Elizabeth Murray, who it wasn't until she was 40 that she said, I need to get serious and get my work going. So as a female who had a family, and I'm really greedy. I wanted a family, I wanted a career, I wanted to make my art, and I stopped making my art for years. I had my kids, and I remember working with Elizabeth Murray at Watt Street. We had a gallery, we had a small gallery space, but we also had another workshop in Manhattan for artists who had young kids that they had to tend to. That way they could come for a few hours and then they'd leave. So we would just work in the shop. Somebody would go into Manhattan, work with them, and then they could go on with their regular day. And she was somebody that I had conversations with because I was starting to feel like my art would never happen. And I was working with younger and younger artists, and some of them really needed to get back into their studio because they started leaning on you too much, like to do problem solving. It's like, I'll be your problem solver, but I'm not gonna be your art maker. So then I just started like really thinking, I gave a talk at Cooper Union on ULA prints, and then I was invited to teach there. So then I started teaching, and I thought, I love this, I love it. Because I didn't go to grad school immediately for printmaking because I wanted to invent. I wanted to be with where it was growing and happening. And grad school to me represented, I will be limited to what my instructors, where they stopped. So I went to the Gods of Printmaking and got my training there. And then I was invited to set up a workshop at Cooper Union. Their ventilation tanks basically rusted out with nitric. So we transformed it to copper and ferric, which was a salt, so no fumes. And I did that for a while, and then I came to Stony Brook. And I had 4 kids by then, and I thought, I'm too far away from my kids to, like, in an emergency, I'm hours away from home. So I thought, okay, I'll keep teaching at Cooper, and then I applied and got my master's at Stony Brook, and I started teaching there, and I thought, I love it, and I love working with young people and teaching them and asking them to pick my brains, and it felt right. So working at Stony Brook, I met Judith Lieber, and that brought me to Setauket. So I taught a lot here, and our workshop is green, so a lot of the techniques that you see around here are full of solvents and lots of hazardous materials that we try to protect our artists from. But in an environment, if you were to come and do your work, I would have modified it or come to give you an alternative. If you love like rich, gorgeous aqua tints, we have a variety of techniques that you could work in. But yeah, there's a full range of possibilities and so many techniques. Any other questions?
You said that Tatiana didn't want to have female printers.
Tatiana.
Was it because of the physicality, or was it another reason?
She was a very traditional lady, and I think she felt very, very clearly that there's male roles and female roles. She would play Russian music for Larry Rivers, and when Buckner came out, he liked steak and green jello, so there was always steak and green jello. And however long artists wanted to work into the night, like Rauschenberg would come and he would have an entourage. And the TV would be on, and there would be noise, and that was his work. His work was about the experience and people and layers of images. So a lot of times the printers would pull all-nighters only because if they're in the flow, you're not going to say, oh, I'm sorry, they're waiting for me for dinner. It's like, no, you didn't even budge. You're just like, we're working, this is just how it goes. And I think that was something that Tonya respected in her artists, that not everybody could find the flow, and when you find it, you can't interrupt it. Whatever they needed, she would go and send people all over to find this one elusive bakery that had whatever arugula or anything that they needed, just to make them comfortable. The house, they could stay in the house. Above the studio was a full apartment, So a lot of times artists like Lee Bontecourt would come out and spend the weekend, go to Fire Island for inspiration. And that whole artist in residence was always happening. So Helen Frankenthaler and Motherwell both worked at ULE, and Helen Frankenthaler funded part of the Center for Contemporary Printmaking in Connecticut, and she modeled it on ULE, like having the house for artists in residence, the workshop right there, a printer on call. When Jasper Johns purchased this property in Connecticut, we sent him lots of presses, set him up with everything he needed. So he actually has a printmaker in residence, and John Lund, featured there, actually works for him on his estate as a full-time printmaker. So any days that Jasper feels like making prints, he's like, okay, John, come up to the studio, I'm ready. And it's a continual, amazing thing. So Jasper's still supporting the studio. Unfortunately, Robert Rauschenberg passed away, and we're just trying to have artists do that same paying forward for other artists. It's wonderful to have an affiliation with the workshop, and some of our artists were trying to be courted by other smaller workshops. I remember the first workshop I worked at, she was saying, I keep contacting Elizabeth Murray, she's not even returning my calls. And she's like, she thinks I'm like a small potato, that must be why. And I guess some artists were like really waiting for the opportunity to be invited. They didn't know that we existed. Jane Hammond, I was speaking with Janice, was invited, and she's like, well, I have a press, what do I need you guys for? And we're thinking, oh, okay. So a lot of sensational projects were done. I was involved in a lot of the later projects. But I would love to talk about the work itself, if anybody has any questions as they walk and see it, about anything at all.
Just one other question.